Good afternoon and happy Juneteenth. I'm Nancy Schick of Third Ear Conflict Resolution, and this is our monthly Third Ear Thursday webinar at 3 p.m. As you can figure, we do that every third Thursday of the month at this particular time Eastern. I'm usually based in New York. I'm in Virginia today. It's hot, hot, hot. But I thought this was the perfect topic for today because, of course, it is Juneteenth, and I know some of you will be watching the recording because you're actually off from work today. And I hope that you're doing what I'll be talking about through this particular webinar in honor of this particular date. A lot of people don't know what Juneteenth is, and that was another reason I thought this was a timely topic and an important topic. It's something that I've heard so many different comments about. One I felt like I wanted to address right away out of the gate is that some people have said, "Oh, this is just a made up holiday." And I just want you to stop and think about that for a moment. I'm sure if you're watching this, you already have some idea of who I am and what I'm about. So you may have some idea of what I will say about this, but bottom line is all holidays are made up, right? Every federal holiday has been made up. There was lobbying for a particular date to be declared a federal holiday, and then it was voted on. So this idea that somehow it's not as important or you don't understand it, I hope to clarify some of that and give you some insight on why this is so important. But before we get into it too deeply, as people come in, just some reminders about doing these kinds of live webinars is I want you to utilize the comments feature. If for those of you that are here, you're watching live, then use those comments. You can use them in the recording if you're finding this on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. Use those comments below. Share your thoughts, your questions. You can connect with each other around this. I'm really big on collaboration, but I also want to invite people to use this as a learning and growing opportunity. That's not always the way we deal with things on social media or in life generally, but that's what I'm about is we have some very difficult issues that we're dealing with in the world, in this country, in our workplaces, et cetera. I'm an employment attorney and a mediator, so again, you can probably get a feel for how I lean. And this is all about helping you open your mind and be ready to learn so that we can start focusing on the solutions that we need to implement to have a more peaceful, productive workplace, life, family, community, and ultimately world. So I ask that while you're here, you respect each other, honor any experiences that are being shared, including mine. Understand that sometimes they're going to be a little imperfect. These are difficult topics that we don't have a lot of experience talking about. We don't tend to have these conversations publicly. So I understand that as well. Even though I'm inviting you to comment, I understand if you're a little bit reluctant and concerned that you might be, canceled or people might come at you online, etc. I completely understand that. I get a little hesitation every time I do one of these webinars, knowing that I'm inviting conversations that might not be productive. I've been in some where in the early days of Zoom during the pandemic, we got Zoom bombed and all the horrible things that were occurring. You heard, I'm sure, about those. Those occurred, and no matter how many times I tried to kick people out, they just kept coming back in and starting more really hateful commentary. So I'm aware of that, and I respect your right to say what you need to or not say what you need to. I just ask that, again, those of you that are here, be mindful of that for each other as well. That's how we move past some of this division that we're seeing. a lot of the conflict that we're seeing, and again, because I resolve conflict for a living, I'm inviting you to just look at things a little differently with a focus on finding solutions. So back to then Juneteenth. With all of that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what Juneteenth is, why some of you are off today and will be watching this as a recording. So the first thing is some of you may not realize this. I did not. I did not know about the historical significance really before the discussions began. I guess the discussions began around the time of George Floyd's murder in 2020. So what I learned, as a lot of you probably have in these past few years, if you're not from Texas, because Texas has been celebrating Juneteenth in various forms as far back as 1872. And then I believe they made it a state holiday in the 80s. But what this is about is, as you can see, one, I get a little emotional because it's not one of our best moments in this country, right? It hurts me to think about how much pain was caused and how many people continued that pain long after we decided as a country that we we didn't want that anymore. Once we decided to acknowledge that slavery was wrong, there were people in Texas for 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed that we're still using enslaved people for labor. And I think we can figure out why, right? This is largely a commercial issue. It was about money, more than likely. I wasn't there. I'm not that old. But I think we can usually trace it back to the monetary incentives for having enslaved persons and enslaved labor. It's the same reasoning that we have today about paying less than living wages. And that's why, although this is a historical marker, we're talking about it still today because we have a lot of greed and a lot of justification around just making money for treating people poorly. Maybe we're not, as a whole, enslaving people for labor at this point, although that is still occurring even in this country. And you can talk to some of the people that work, for example, with human trafficking, and you will find that, yes, there is still forced labor occurring in this country. That's why this is important. So moving forward, then we go to 2020. George Floyd is murdered in the course of an arrest. And obviously, you'd have to have been living under a rock probably to have missed that. But with the protests and everything else during the unrest, in the middle of a global pandemic as well, the federal government decided that Juneteenth should become not just a state holiday in Texas and occasionally celebrated in other ways privately, but we wanted this to be a federal holiday to emphasize that we're moving beyond these days of our darkest past. So on June 17th of 2021, Juneteenth became a federal holiday in the United States. Now, what does that mean? Some of you who are here, you know that that means not everybody gets the day off. You may be working today, or if you're not and you've come on the webinar, I appreciate you for taking your time during a holiday. And this is part of how we commemorate this particular holiday. It's to engage in communities. This is a call for you to engage in your civic duty. Maybe it's run for office. Maybe it's just show up for board the school board meetings or community board meetings. I was in a neighborhood meeting last night and am learning how to be more engaged in my small community as well, where I may have a voice and have influence. This is what we encourage with Juneteenth. It's not like other holidays like the 4th of July that we consider a little bit more static. It's about, 4th of July is about when America gained its independence from the Brits after the Revolutionary War. It seems a little more set in stone. We have a date and we say, yay, we're free. Well, Juneteenth is about something a little bit different because, again, I mentioned that we're still dealing with issues of forced labor, human trafficking, and some of the worst human rights violations in this country currently. So this is a holiday that is intended to be used to engage you in facilitating the changes we want to see. And sometimes that is doing things like making sure you're registered to vote. A lot of states had their primary elections this week, and I'm certain, based on the number of voters, that a large percentage of Americans who are eligible to vote did not vote. Some aren't even registered. But that may also be because of a lack of information. And that was also a big part of the historical significance. So here we were in as a country. I wasn't there again. So when I say we, I'm saying the United States as a country. And I emphasize that point because we've gotten into a lot of these conversations lately about you, they, we, and it starts to get very muddied. But we're talking about people that in 1865, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, decided to blatantly violate the law. And it wasn't until then, 1865, on June 19th, that the word even got out that all of these enslaved persons were free and did not know it. So, thinking about that, how can you participate in your community? What do you know about that you can share with others to help empower them toward this ongoing pursuit of freedom? That is what Juneteenth is about. Now, for those of you that are employers, because I do work with a lot of employers, there are a few things that I came up with that I think would be very helpful for you, especially in the context of the bans on diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of employers got nervous about having any kind of celebration of Juneteenth because of its close connection to Black history and the concerns, for example, of, well, if I am doing Juneteenth and participating in Black history, don't I then, especially with the Ames case that was just decided in the past 2 weeks, I believe it was, do I then also have to have a white history acknowledgement? And we could get into a whole conversation that takes us down the rabbit hole. We're not going to do that, right? What I want to talk about is what you can do then. So, some of the things that are considered relatively neutral from a legal perspective, although I'm only giving some general information, not legal advice in this particular webinar. And actually, I never give legal advice in a webinar because legal advice is intended for me to work with a client and we're in a confidential capacity. So I just a couple of reminders with that because these nuances are very, very important. But here are three things you can do if you're an employer who says, wow, I really feel kind of strange that I'm not even acknowledging Juneteenth. And obviously, it's a little late for you to do it this year. And I think some employers chose not to do anything because they pulled back. It takes a lot of time to plan events depending on how large you might be and what type of event you want to do. So we forgive you for that. We understand you're regrouping under the DEI bans, probably with the guidance of legal counsel. So this is more for what are you going to do next year? what are the ways that you can have a celebration of Juneteenth or any other holiday that might have racial components, historical components, things that could get murky, right? You also have gender issues, disability issues, and we have a lot of different days that we declare to celebrate our diversity in this country. And now you're, as an employer, you might be wondering, how do I navigate this now? So one of the things that we're seeing employers do is offer paid time off, and you could do it in a way that's a floating holiday, and that allows people to choose a certain number for their whatever is personally significant for them. And this is for private employers. Obviously, if you're a federal employee, you got today off, and in some states you may have gotten the day off. But as a private employer, this is one way to address it. If you're not in Texas, if you're and you want to acknowledge the holiday, then you may offer, a chunk of them. What a lot of people will do these days is just say, you have X number of PTO days, and you have the option to use those for things like Juneteenth or National Women's Day or International Women's Day, whatever it is for you. You don't have to tell me, just tell me when you want to take your PTO. I don't need to know what it's about. And that's a nice neutral way of addressing it and giving people the opportunity to engage in the civic duty, the voter registration, those kinds of things that Juneteenth, for example, is about. Then another thing that you could consider is just having educational initiatives around various historical events, but I caution you to make sure that you are then including a broad range. And one of the easiest ways to do that is look at what the federal holidays are. And every time there's a federal holiday, explain what it's about, give a little historical context. And you can do that through email, posters, providing workshops, resources online, or any other internal communication channel. This is a way that you just support your employees and broaden their thinking, and then you can tie it back to things going on in your workplace, which is where we get into these inclusive workplace celebrations. Like, it's not just about having a big party and having pretty decorations, especially something like Juneteenth, especially these other types of celebrations or commemorations of historical figures, historical events. Ultimately, it's an opportunity for you to tie things back to what actually happened on that date and how it might apply in your workplace today and inspire some new actions. So, something I talked about in my promo video for this particular webinar was a great way to bring Juneteenth into your workplace, into the conversation. Is Juneteenth is all about how the communication did not get to Texas, to the enslaved persons. So you can probably think about things going on in your workplace where not everyone is informed, for example, of a change in policy or a new benefit that's being offered. This is your opportunity to make sure everybody has the information they need to succeed in your workplace. Then other things that you might consider doing is conduct an assessment to find out, where are there shortcomings in your workplace, not just in communication, but where are the inequities? What can you do to make sure that you are providing fair processes? Are you offering benefits to everyone in fair ways? And are you providing what everyone needs to succeed in your particular workplace? I am continuing to do the webinar series with Spectra Diversity, where we're talking about DEI in a variety of capacities and some of the initiatives that may be called into question. But ultimately, I'm working with Spectra also because they do the objective data collection, and then they will help you, and I can help as well. They can help you implement changes that create those inclusive workplace cultures. That is really where I would like you to focus for Juneteenth. And I think that's what we're looking in your workplace. That's where you have control. And you've probably heard me say that before. I focus there because you can't change necessarily your community in the same way. You can influence your community. And I absolutely encourage you to get involved in your community and find out where you can use your power and influence in furtherance of equality and equity and equal opportunity for all. That's where you have the most opportunity. You can't change what happened in Galveston, and you can't change what happened before then, right? But what you can do is lay a foundation for the future. So I see that we do have a guest, and so I invite you, if you want to put anything in the chat, if you have any questions about Juneteenth, about how to implement various policies with DEI, what types of celebrations are you engaging in? It's nice to even know, are you celebrating Juneteenth? Do you feel weird about that? I will share for myself, I hesitated and I commented about that on social media. I hesitated to do anything about Juneteenth because my initial response was, well, that's a celebration of Black culture and Black communities, because again, Juneteenth is new to me. So I've learned a lot about the history. I also learned that we celebrate Juneteenth and the information getting to the enslaved people in Texas, but it was actually several months later for a couple of the other states still. So this was an ongoing problem. I think we all know that. The promises that were made to the enslaved persons did not occur. We've got a lot there that I could go completely into a different topic and probably do a 3-hour webinar on that. But I think ultimately what my call to action is for you today and going forward is to look in your communities, look in your life where you have influence, and use your power to open opportunities for other people. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. So I'll just leave this as a thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. I again invite you to share comments below wherever you're watching this particular video. We want to know what your questions are. I want to know what you'd like to hear about in a future webinar. It won't always be on a holiday, but I do record them for this reason. I know everybody is very busy. I also know that a lot of us are completely webinared out at this point, zoomed out, etc. That is completely fine. I just want you to know I'm here to support you, and especially if you're looking to do what I am, which is create a more well, we don't have to create the diverse the diverse community. We already have that. But to create it as more equitable, to create more opportunities for everyone to collaborate and ultimately have a world where we're included based on our agreements, of course. We need to treat each other fairly. But ultimately, I believe if we create the opportunities and we have the equity and we have more opportunities, that the inclusion kind of takes care of itself. They're all so interrelated. And ultimately, I think that we can do a lot better than we are in getting along. So if you need help with that, there's my contact information. So thank you, Lee, for sharing a comment. I'm just going to take a moment to read it. Yep, I think you're absolutely right. There's a A need for more of, education, I think, around Juneteenth as well, and it may be exactly what I shared about my own experiences, feeling kind of strange as a white woman engaging with Juneteenth because for a long time it felt like it was for Black people and not for me, but this is such a deep part of our history and an important part of our future. So I hope I'm gonna go find your post, and for those of you watching it, if you didn't see Lee's comment, I invite you to find him on LinkedIn as well and look for his comment. We're engaged in several conversations around DEI, around civil rights, around creating opportunities and bringing basically the world together, one little collaboration at a time. So Lee will be my guest next month on this Thursday webinar at 3 p.m. I believe that means it will be on the 17th of July at 3 p.m. Eastern. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much. Have a great holiday and a great day.